Hello, everyone. This is Covenant Eyes TV, helping you to be safe and pure online. Today, we've got a special program for you where we're going to be talking about what do I do when my child has been exposed to pornography on the internet. We got a special guest for you today. His name is Dan Martin. Dan is the director of parenting ministry at Pure Hope, where he oversees the development of their many parenting ministry activities and resources. He helps to cultivate partnerships with churches all across the country and equip parents to raise kids in the sexualized culture that's all around us. And he has some fantastic things to tell us today on Covenant Eyes TV. Well, Dan, you're no stranger to this situation of a parent coming home and finding out that their child has actually been accessing inappropriate content, accessing pornography online. You're no stranger to this. This happened to you. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I can, and I am no stranger to it with three teenagers at home.
Right.
Yeah, I've experienced this myself, my wife and I both, and for us the thing is we were parents who I would say were pretty engaged and pretty informed. This was prior to my work with Pure Hope, that my first child was first exposed to pornography online. But we were the parents who had filters and were making sure that we were doing everything we could to keep pornography from coming in our home. But the interesting thing is all three of my kids, over a course of a few different years, were exposed to pornography. It's one of those inevitable things that parents have to face today and need to understand that more than likely, in fact, I tell parents all the time, just plan on it happening. At some point, your kids are going to be exposed to pornography. The first time for us, my wife and I was actually at a meeting at church getting ready to go on a mission trip. It was a preparation meeting for a mission trip, and my wife calls me just frantic and says, "You got to come home." And I said, "Well, I can't come home. I'm in the middle of this meeting." She said, "No, you have to come home." And so I came home and just was expecting the worst. And what had happened was she had discovered that my oldest child was looking at pornography.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the first time. Come to find out that he had seen it, but he was just a wreck as well. He was in his room, crying, upset, and very discouraged. And I had to walk through this whole process with him. This process of discovering pornography, and the same scenario happened with all three of my kids. I remember with my middle child. First time that she discovered pornography was just an innocent search online that brought up a number of different websites that, windows were opening left and right on her windows. She saw some of the most graphic images that, more graphic than I had ever seen, because she left them on her computer, came downstairs screaming that this was going on with her computer. And then with my youngest son, same thing. Actually, his first exposure was with a mobile device.
Oh.
And that's just the progression, too, of how technology has changed, where my first two kids, their first exposure was on a computer. My youngest son, who's 17 years old now, his first exposure was on a mobile device.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
There's, that's something now that we're talking more and more to parents about, just with,
sure.
with what's going on with mobile devices.
Now, with all three of these instances, do you
Yeah.
look back and say there was something specific, whether it be in technology, whether it be in the way I prepared my kids or something, that I could have done that would have prevented this thing from happening, at least in that instance? Is there something that you think, oh, I should have done that?
If it hadn't happened in that instance, I think it would have happened again at
Sure.
another time.
Okay.
And so what I would say is what I wish I had done a better job of doing is giving my kids kind of a step-by-step, when you see porn, this is what you do. Prepare them, give them kind of the manual for, listen, this is probably going to happen. I probably wouldn't have used the word pornography when I introduced this to them. I would have said, you're going to see some images of people without their clothes on, or something that would have been appropriate at their age level that they would have understood.
Yeah.
And if and when that happens, here's what I want you to do. And the first thing would be, I want you to tell us, I want you to come to us. Just opening the door for them to have a conversation with us. Listen,
Right.
you're not going to be in trouble. You're not going to, mom and dad aren't going to be mad at you when this happens, but just helping them prepare for that. And we were able to do that with my other two kids.
Mm.
That we didn't do that with my oldest son, which is why it was such a traumatic experience for him.
Mm.
And I wish I would have helped him to kind of know how to react and prepare for that moment better.
Right. Now, what are the dangers here? You've got, some people listening to this, maybe they're not sure exactly what the extent of the damage is in this instance, right? Maybe they've seen, they know their child's looked at pornography on a specific occasion or has been looking at pornography repeatedly over days or even weeks or months. Yeah. And maybe the question is this a big deal? Is this something I need to make a big deal about at all? I mean, what do I need to do with this?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question, and I would answer that by saying a couple things. There's so much going on with a child, especially a young child, in the area of their heart development and in the area of their brain development.
Sure.
Pornography plays into both of those things tremendously. First with their heart development, a child is wired to experience intimacy. They are wired to crave intimacy, and they're wired to want to connect emotionally with adults, with other kids. It's just something that we're wired to do.
Right.
What pornography does is it kind of hijacks that intimacy, rather than that intimacy happening in a healthy way between parents and child, or siblings and children in a healthy way, developmental way. What pornography does is it kind of hijacks that emotional intimacy, and it ties in sexuality with intimacy. Mm-hmm. So now you've got this situation where the child has developed a sexualized view of intimacy that can be incredibly unhealthy and something that could be with them for the rest of their lives, where they tie the two together, where sexualized behavior, sexualized images, sexualized actions are equated with and intertwined with intimacy. And then the other thing that happens is in the brain development. And as you're familiar with, and I don't know if our listeners are or not, Dr. William Struthers has written a book specifically on male brain development called Wired for Intimacy.
It's a good book.
And it's a wonderful book, but it really talks about how those early images and those early connection with pornography can really cause brain development to kind of get for the brain to get wired in a specific way to crave that type of intimacy, those sexualized intimacy moments. And he's done great work in that book on identifying that specifically with boys. And then, when you look on the other side with girls, and I think a lot of parents just think that this is an issue with their boys. This is a huge issue with girls. As girls are viewing pornography, as they view the images that they're seeing on the screen, their heart development, their brain development is being rewired. Yeah. And you think about the issues that they have with body image because of the photoshopped images that they're looking at, and they're seeing pictures of what they're supposed to look like, or they're watching a video on how they're supposed to perform. And it just sets up these girls for all kinds of destruction down the road, and even opens them up, and we can talk about this more later, but even opens them up for potentially sexual abuse, where they are making themselves vulnerable because of images that they've seen and things that they viewed online. Not intentionally, but unintentionally, just because of the behavior that they've seen and been witness to.
It's interesting because I think that parents who are confronted with this, where they find evidence of the of what's been viewed on a computer or on a smartphone or a tablet or something like that, they find the evidence
Yeah.
of viewing pornography, they're probably not under no illusion about exactly what it is that they've seen. If mom or dad finds it and they're confronted with the images themselves, they know how graphic it was, and perhaps extremely graphic. But for those who haven't been assaulted with that yet, who haven't found that kind of evidence, I mean, what kind of images are we talking here? I mean, is this just like the pinup images that I would have seen, in
Yeah.
Grandpa's workshop 40 years ago? I mean, what are we talking about? What exactly? What sort of images or even videos or whatever are really assaulting the senses of our kids?
Well, Luke, and that's a sad thing. I mean, our kids are being exposed to what I would call violent pornography. Um, in
Hmm.
my own home, in my kids' situation, my kids were exposed to things like bestiality. They were exposed to group sex. They were exposed to things that I didn't even know existed until I was in my adulthood. That's the type of thing, that's the type of pornography that many kids are being exposed to very early on, whether that be
Yeah.
an innocent search that pulls something up, or whether that be a pornographer who specifically is targeting kids, which is happening all the time now. Pornographers are specifically trying to target kids and get them to click on things by using
Hmm.
some tricky words or keywords that they think kids will be interested in. But they're seeing graphic images, they're seeing violent sexuality. And when we go back to that brain development and that heart development that's going on, let's say with an 8 or a 9-year-old child, and their first exposure to sexuality is this violent form or this really graphic form of pornography that they're seeing, it just, you can imagine the damage that does to a young mind.
Sure. I actually heard some people equate it in some ways to the type of responses that the brain has in times of sexual abuse. So if you
Yeah.
can, of course the experiences physically are very different, but the experiences neurologically are in some ways the same. That you have the senses assaulted with this sexualized, hypersexualized experience that was not asked for, that was not sought for, but that just sort of came upon you. It's
Yeah.
some would even say it's like the brain was raped, and
Yeah.
it's in a lot of ways I think that could be very accurately said.
I think it is. I was talking with a friend of mine who does a lot of work with kids, and
Mm.
he's a psychologist. And one of the things that he said to me, we were talking about this, and I asked him the question, what kind of thing are you seeing from kids who have been exposed to pornography early on? And his comment to me was, he said, it's similar to other types of trauma that
Hmm.
that the reaction with the child is very similar, to maybe a child witnessing the death of someone or a child
Hmm.
seeing something incredibly traumatic. He said we see similar signs with kids where they're dealing with this like they would in any other trauma, where there's depression, there's a withdrawal, there's an isolation, they're having trouble sleeping at night. There's
Hmm.
all kinds of signs here that parents ought to be looking for, that parents ought to be looking for signs of trauma. That trauma could be something like having viewed pornography, or it could be something more that the parent needs to be aware of, like sexual abuse that could be going on. But it's a traumatic experience for the child.
Hmm. Now, we've said all this, and you wanted to bring up. I know you wanted to bring up the possibility of leading to possible sexual abuse in the future. And since we're on that trauma topic, why don't you go ahead and just mention that?
Yeah, I think parents need to be very aware of that. And the statistics on that are ones that are not pleasant statistics to hear about. But the truth is, about 1 in 4 girls today and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused, and those numbers come from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. That where those numbers are coming from, but that sexual abuse and the trauma that they experience can present itself in a number of different ways. I mentioned some of them, just the isolation, the withdrawal, the lack of sleep, um, just some of those things that the child sees. And it's really important here that the parents are doing some investigation on their own, where they're really trying to figure out what's going on with the child, what has happened to the child potentially. Um, One of the things that we tell parents all the time is one of the conversations you ought to be having with your child is we don't keep secrets in our home,
Hmm.
because what these abusers will do and what these pedophiles will do is they will tell the child that this is their secret, or that they're going this is a secret just between them and the child. And so for parents it's very important early on to establish we don't keep secrets in our house. For mommy and daddy, you don't keep secrets from us. And so this discovery with the child of a series of questions when they notice some signs of trauma that might be going on is really important for them. And I hate to be the person to say this, but one of the things that we've got to be looking for, in addition to physical abuse, is sexual abuse that can be occurring. The statistics are such that if 25% of girls are being sexually abused, then we have got to be more diligent as parents. I've got to be more diligent with my kids, and parents need to be more diligent to really be kind of the first responders to that, to
Mhm.
find out, does this child need to get more help? Do I need to seek some professional help here?
Right. Well, since we've kind of set this thing up with a lot of doom and gloom, I think it's good to I think it's really good to give
Yeah.
parents some practical steps to go from here, because while we're saying all this stuff about how pornography is hijacking the brain, it's doing all kinds of, assaulting the senses of our kids. You gave the stories of your own kids and how that can be very traumatizing to a child, and we know that can be traumatizing to a child to see sexualized images, to see pornography. Um, is this just like an irreparable scar? I mean, is there something that parents can do right now, today, that finding out this information, they can go and they can begin taking steps right now to begin to repair this,
Yeah.
and then build some, and then, what do we do after step one and step two? Just lay it out for us.
Yeah. And I hope this is helpful. And I think this is one of those things. I know as a parent of three kids, every child's different, but I'll just give some practical things that I think a parent ought to do. Things I wish I had done maybe a little bit more, and some things that I think would be really helpful with the child. If you've discovered your child has viewed pornography, the first rule is don't overreact. I think one of the things that parents do, and not to point out one gender doing it better or worse than the other, but a lot of times it's the mother catching the son or discovering the son using pornography, and the tendency is to overreact, and that you really got to fight that tendency. Don't overreact to this. Yes, I know these images are harmful, and all these things that we just talked about. But that child is vulnerable, probably more vulnerable than ever. If you've discovered pornography, it's probably not their first time. This has probably been a secret that the child has been keeping for a while. This has been something that they have hidden. It's something that's inside, and we just can't overreact to it. So, two additional thoughts on that. Don't overreact. If this is a self confession, the child comes to you and says, I've seen this image, or I've been viewing this stuff. That's a home run. That's a great thing. We ought to thank that child for coming forward, and thank you should be the first words out of our mouth in that situation. If you as a parent have discovered that your child is using pornography, here's what I would encourage you to do is work with that child to try to get them to self-confess that. I think that's just a healthy thing if it's the child who's the one who's confessing it. Ask some probing questions. ask some things that might get that child, that gives them permission to self-confess that to you. That may or may not be the case, but either way, if you discovered, if you happen to walk in the room and see that the child is using pornography, just don't overreact. That would be the first thing I would say. Second thing I would say is be willing to be vulnerable to that child. Go back in your mind as a parent to when you were 9 or 10 or 11 years old and say to that child things like, I remember when I was your age, or I remember when I first saw pornography. Really bring it home to that child, because what we want to convey to our children really is that you're not alone, and they probably have felt incredibly alone and isolated since they've been viewing this, because there's just this inward thing that we automatically feel like there's something wrong with looking at pornography. That's just built into us. That's part of God's design, I think, is having that inside us. So the child has probably been dealing with that, but you're not alone. And then the second thing is, you're not weird. It's very natural for a young boy or a young girl, out of curiosity, to click on images that they see, for them to be curious about sexuality. Whether we like to admit it or not, our kids were created sexual beings. Sexual curiosity that we have to help them with and help develop. That's why pornography is so attractive to them, because they have this innate sexual curiosity that's going on. So we want to make sure that we're conveying to them, listen, you're not weird because you're looking at porn. That doesn't make you a weirdo. We need to talk about that in a way that doesn't isolate them further, that doesn't heap shame upon them, that lets them know, hey, this is something that I struggle with. When I've talked to my boys about their pornography use, or I've talked about anything sexual, I've always tried to bring it back to the context of, I remember when I was 12, I remember when I was 15, whatever it was, and I struggled with these things. Of course, I didn't have one of these in my back pocket. I wasn't walking around with a mobile device that could access porn 24/7. I'm scared to death to think of, if I had that when I was their age, what would have happened. But trying to be vulnerable to them, trying to make sure that they understand that this is a struggle that I have. This is as a male, or as a mother talking to a daughter, or a father talking to a daughter, that it's understandable that you have this curiosity. All girls do. They have this curiosity, so they're not weird, and they're not different because they have this. And then finally, this does not make you a bad person. You're not bad because you did this. You may have done a bad thing, or you may have seen bad images, or whatever that might be, but you are not a bad person. You are not bad. I think so. Not alone, not weird, not bad. Make sure that we're conveying messages to them that keep that shame feeling away from them as much as we possibly can. And then next, I would say, just keep talking. When and if you discover pornography, your child using pornography, and you have a conversation with them, keep talking about it. I see so many parents want to take that one incident, put it in the closet, and never visit it again. And I really think that's dangerous. Continue to visit that. I'm not saying that every conversation and every day we bring it up. But for instance, with my kids, we've had a regular check-in with them. Hey, how's that going? Hey, is there anything, we need to talk about? Or, one of the things you mentioned to me was that this particular website or this particular app on your phone was kind of a trigger for you. How's that going? Or have you seen anything on there? My wife and I really tried to keep the door open to keep that conversation going, because what we have found is that such a as I mentioned before, it's such an event that can cause isolation. The only way we're going to keep that from happening with our kids is if we bring it out in the open and we shed light on it often. I would say that it would be important after you've had these conversations, after you've discovered and had these talks, begin to set some boundaries. Set some boundaries with your kids, not for your kids. There's a big difference there. I've always tried to include my kids, not just in issues related to internet safety and pornography and that sort of thing, but just in boundaries in general, in living, in rules in our home. Always try to engage your kids in those. Let them feel some ownership in the boundaries that you set for them. Maybe there's a little negotiation that goes on. We want you off the computer at 8 o'clock. And maybe they say, well, could I go to 8:15? Yes, you can go to 8:15.
Right.
That gives them some ownership. That gives them some ownership to those boundaries. Some other boundaries, you guys have a great product, Covenant Eyes. We have Covenant Eyes on all of our computers at home. We have Covenant Eyes on all of our mobile devices. And for us, some of the boundaries are every device that you have is going to have Covenant Eyes on it, where we're going to get a report and we're going to have a weekly conversation about your internet accountability report. That's a good check-in time for us, really is. It's a good time for me. Even now, my oldest son, who's off at college, when he was leaving to go to college, he brought his laptop to me. He'd gotten a new laptop. He brought his laptop to me and he said, Dad, would you put Covenant Eyes on this? And I said, yeah, sure I will. And he goes, I know you have it on your computer, and I probably need to have it on my computer at school too. And that for me, that was just a home run. I mean, that was him taking some ownership for boundaries in his own life. And we have the opportunity to do that with our kids early on, is make them a part of setting boundaries and consequences. What are the consequences for going beyond this boundary? Let them know that clearly up front and be very consistent about those consequences. Make sure you follow through, that you're doing what you say you're going to do when it comes to consequences if the child breaks that. I already mentioned look for the signs of trauma. I think that's important. But here's the most important thing I think we can do. And I talk to parents about this all the time. We have got to present our kids with healthy sexuality. Yes, we know that unhealthy sexuality is all over them. We hear all the time about the sexualized culture. We hear about media. We hear about songs. We hear about all the bad stuff that's out there. We hear about pornography. Yes, that is unhealthy sexuality. But if we want our kids to have a strong, healthy sexuality, we've got to do a couple things. Number one, we got to talk about healthy sexuality. What is healthy sexuality? And parents have the opportunity to model healthy sexuality for their kids. Sometimes healthy sexuality that I model for my kids is holding hands with my wife, or it's complimenting my wife, or it's showing my kids the vulnerability and the emotional intimacy that I share with my wife in front of them. We've got to model healthy sexuality for our kids, because here's what I believe more than anything. The culture, the world is telling a story to our kids about sexuality. And as parents, we've got to deliver a more compelling story. We've got to be louder, and we've got to be more convincing to our kids than media, than the internet, than mobile devices. And believe me, those have a huge influence on our kids and our children. But no study after study has been done. No other influence is greater on our kids than parents, moms, dads. So we have the best opportunity to show our kids healthy sexuality. I can build a bubble around my kids. I can protect them and shelter them from all kinds of unhealthy sexuality, pornography, all of those things. But if I'm not showing them healthy sexuality, if I'm not modeling that for them, they're not going to know what it looks like. They're not going to know what to emulate. And so parents just need to be very, very intentional about delivering a better story about sex than what culture around us is telling them.
So So my question then is, for the nitty gritty here, because I love what you're saying here about modeling healthy sexuality. For a lot of parents, they're going to be thinking, my child just saw the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And I see that there's a long tail here. There's a bigger picture. I can be more proactive in how I talk to my children about sexuality and how I model sexuality. But how much cleanup do I need to do here? So they say you got a 9-year-old kid. They have their birds and the bees conversations with their parents has been maybe nothing,
Yeah.
maybe just a very little bit. Maybe they knew about anatomy, but maybe that's about it. And
Yeah.
so now they just seen all this graphic stuff.
Yeah.
Is this the best time now for parents to begin dishing out information for their children, like resetting or trying to reframe? No, this is what it's all about. I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to model sexuality from this day forward. I'm going to hold hands and I'm going to kiss my wife and I'm going to compliment her and those sort of things. And they say, well, that's all well and good, but my son just saw something terrible, something graphic, and he doesn't even know what sexuality is for or how it all works. What do I need to do? Like, what are the nuts and bolts information I now need to give to my child?
Yeah. I'll answer that just in a solution that Pure Hope, the organization that I direct our parenting ministry for, one of the things that we've developed is a guide for parents. And the first section in that guide, and what I would say to parents, the first thing that we ought to do, whether our child has seen violent pornography or graphic images or not, been exposed in one way or the other, we need to really answer the question for our kids, why sex? Why was I created as a sexual being? And we start with what we call the foundation, which is God's design and purpose for sex. Why did God create us as sexual beings? Why did he create this thing called sex? We need to start with that better story. Now, maybe we're beginning with that story after exposure to some of the things that you just mentioned. But we need to explain to our kids, why is this even a curiosity of mine? Or why am I so drawn to this? Or, just especially as they grow up, we need to give them a biblical understanding of God's purpose. This is not an accident. He didn't do that. He didn't mess up and accidentally make us sexual beings that had sexual desires. It's part of his plan. We talk about 4 things specifically when we talk to kids, or when we're equipping parents to talk to their kids about sex, and it's easy to remember 4 P's. We need to talk about pleasure. We need to talk about procreation. We need to talk about protection, and we need to talk about proclamation. Those are the 4 P's that we kind of lay out that are behind the purposes of sex. They're behind the purposes of God-given covenant marriage sex, and that's the starting point for parents. I think, especially if their child has seen some of these things, is let's not just give them the birds and the bees, the biology of sex, but let's give them the why of sex. Let's give them what is the plan? Why was it even? Why did God do it this way? And what's the purpose of it? What's it leading to? Why are there these rules? We call them guardrails in the resource that I was just talking about. Why do I have these guardrails that God's given me? It's not because he doesn't want me to enjoy it. It's not because God is this great killjoy who doesn't want us to have good sex. No, it's because he knows that ultimately his plan is what's best for us. And as parents as I'm talking to my kids about these issues, I'm constantly pointing them to what God has for them, not what he's keeping them from, but what he has for them. And that's a quick answer to your question, but it's really about laying out that foundation.
Excellent. That's good. Thank you so much, Dan, for everything you've imparted to us today, and for what you've been telling the parents who are undergoing this situation right now. Hopefully, we have parents listening right now who haven't faced this situation, and now they're going to be more equipped to deal with it even before it comes down their way. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for everything you've said today. I appreciate it.